So it's June 21st, 2024. I'm here in Oakland. This is my new home. Welcome. And I just watched a great dialogue that I wish I could have joined in on between Brendan Graham Dempsey and John Vervaeke. And they were talking about metamodern Christianity and the possibility of reclaiming a kind of faith in Christ, I guess, in a postmodern, modern, and modern historical moment, right? Or, there are these series of historical moments which have changed the way that human beings relate to this God image, to use a Jungian term, or the idea of God, belief in this being. We've moved through, ancient, medieval, modern, postmodern, and now perhaps metamodern phases of self-understanding in relationship to this image, let's call it, of God, right? Or this symbol of Christ. But, Brendan and John especially were also invoking Socrates, who is above my head here. We could bring in Buddha, we could bring in Krishna. There are various religious figures, and so part of inheriting the Christian tradition, the Christian religion, in a living way is going to require coming into dialogue with this plurality of other religious and cultural and spiritual lineages, and the beings that they have concressed around as being not just teachers but embodiments of the divine in some sense. And so Christians have always, or usually, insisted on the uniqueness of Christ, which seems to position Christ in competition with Buddha or with Krishna or something. And I think there is no competition here. But just as there is something universal about what Buddha or Buddhism has achieved, that it's universal in the sense that all human beings can learn from it, and not just that they can, but they should. I think there is a value vector here, which is that flowers forth out of the world's wisdom traditions, and there are a plurality of them, and I wouldn't want to police which are in and which are out. There are plurality, and it's an always proliferating plurality, and we want to be maximally inclusive, but that there is, I believe, reason for us to affirm that it is it would be best for everyone to have a deep understanding of the teachings of the Buddha. And I also think, for the same evolutionary reasons, and I'm talking about the evolution of consciousness here, it would be important for every human being to have a deep relationship with Christ and to learn about this story of Jesus, but beyond just Jesus as a particular historical figure. I think we can recognize a kind of cosmic Christ, a kind of, Christ as cosmogram and not just symbol. When we say symbol, it's easy to say, well, this is a cultural artifact, maybe some kind of instinctual pattern in the human psyche. It's unconscious, manifesting, and it comes forth as a symbol of this thing. And but we don't give it any cosmic grounding or meaning beyond the human. And I think it's not that Christ has meaning beyond the human, it's that the meaning of Christ takes us beyond what we thought it meant to be human. Just as, let's say Buddha consciousness is an evolutionary development in the, let's say, gradual incarnation of the I, of the first person, the ego, this sense of self, of being able to say, I am. That is brought more deeply into relationship with the earth through what Buddha and Buddhists and the influence of Buddhism has achieved. And I think this incarnation of the I was deepened also by what Jesus did. And whether we, to what degree we can claim to know anything in particular, or with any degree of certainty about the historical Jesus, I think that there is a moral wake, a shockwave, in fact, that emanates from the Christ event. And whether or not we're capable of knowing the particular historical details and the facts of whether Jesus actually said this or that is less important than receiving the feeling, the vibration of that event, because it was a real event. And it's the kind of event that is just as mythic as it is historical, that is, yes, symbolic, but also archetypal and cosmic. And so, Christ as Cosmogram, I think, is an invitation, at least, to consider something about this moment of meeting between the eternal and the historical, between God and the human being, which occurs at this moment in history, is a kind of turning point in time, which is a phrase that Rudolf Steiner uses. And the thing here, though, is not to get hung up on what happened in the past. And I agree with, Brendan here, who's trying to point towards the future, that God is something that is emerging, that we are creating together, rather than something that created us, or simply created us. I mean, Brendan and John were both talking about the numinous and the way in which it is always going to be in excess of our attempts to understand it, and certainly to control and manipulate it. And that's terrifying. And religions are often helping us to cope with that terrifying situation. But they're not just coping mechanisms, they're also training routines. And, religions are offering us, yes, a safe harbor, but also a passage into the beyond. And is that passage safe? Well, no. Life isn't really safe, right? In the end, we die. And so the passage always is going to include a close examination and observation of death, and its mirror, birth. And so religions are bringing us into, that's why we have priests, and why we have, these ways of relating to sex and death that have tended to be numinous for religions. And numinosity can bring fear and repression just as much as it can bring glorification and exaltation. And so, there's something about this process of secularization whereby we're trying to free ourselves from the repressive aspects of the religious response to the numinous. But to the extent that secularism tries to create a new umbrella for us, as if we could be shielded from the chaos of reality, it itself becomes a form of compensation, of coping mechanism. And, John pointed this out. And so, yes, we can say, and I agree with Brendan, that, the modern is a development, a graduation of something has been learned beyond the medieval and the ancient. But I think unless the modern can integrate, if it's not just rejecting, but can integrate what is of value in the, a kind of mythical and magical pre-modern form of consciousness, because there is something that is essential about being able to relate to magic and myth as real, and also to value analysis and rationality and science, and to see that these things aren't competing with each other. And so to the extent that, we're unable to, as John Gebster would say, see transparently through these different structures of consciousness and these, if we want, to use Brendan's language, kind of these developmental plateaus, well, it's really a stairway, but we reach a level where we become capable of a richer understanding of who we are and what this is. Um, but I mentioned the turning point in time and Rudolf Steiner's take on all of this. I've been reading this book, Occult Science. I'm not going to go into too much about it right now, but I wanted to read actually what he says here when he's talking about the evolution of the earth and human history. He says, since the event of Christ, human beings who lift themselves to the Christ mystery can carry with them into the spiritual world what has been gained here in the world of the senses. And from the spiritual world, it then flows back again, seeing that human beings, when they reincarnate, bring with them what the Christ impulse has become for them in the spiritual world between death and a new birth. All that was conferred upon human evolution through the coming of Christ has been working in it like a seed. Only by degrees can the seed ripen. Up to the present, no more than the minutest part of the depths of the new wisdom has found its way into physical existence. We are but at the beginning of Christian evolution. So, the Earth is itself an evolutionary process, and I would say it's more than just a geo-bio, psycho-logical evolutionary process. It's also a spiritual evolutionary event. Gustav Fechner is this brilliant physicist and psychologist, physicist, you could even say. But he was also a brilliant speculative philosopher who developed this really wonderful panpsychist cosmology. And, for him, the Earth is an angel. It's a living being, certainly. And, he's perfectly comfortable with analogies between we multicellular animals and then the larger animal, the whole Earth. Nowadays, after Lovelock and Margulis, we call it Gaia. The Earth is a living system. And I think as we struggle to respond to our own deaths, which is a perennial human situation, but also now increasingly we're, as a civilization, being called to wake up to the fact that the Earth is dying. We are killing her. And that is a grave recognition, a grave realization, and puts a tremendous responsibility on us. It's not clear that we can save the patient. I mean, to the extent that the patient is complex life, animal life, let's say, and in fact human civilization, for us to maintain that kind of complex life with the sort of climate change that is projected to be headed our way, is going to be a neat feat. So it's not clear that we can avoid a major dying event, a mass extinction event. It's not clear we can avoid that at this point. And so what is the role of metamodern Christianity or religion and spirituality in general when we can say pretty much for sure that the Earth is dying? Or at least that there is a significant die-off occurring. Maybe, simpler forms of life will continue on the planet, but how do we relate to that? We're so used to a civilization built on this idea of progress, this myth of progress, and again, it's the whole thing about secularism. It's just another form of religion, right? And so we might want to say modern secularism is somehow developmentally in advance of these traditional religions, but at the same time, to the extent that what is of importance in that mythic vision is lost, to the extent that there's a repression of the ineradicable role of story in our human lives, including in our attempts to scientifically explain anything. We're always using narrative and metaphor in order to make sense of the universe. So there's no escape from that. And if we repress it and we become modern and secularize over and against, in rejection of religion, then yeah, we end up in an imbalanced situation. So I think what Steiner is suggesting here is that, I mean, he doesn't say it in that quote, but elsewhere, and other more contemporary sociologists and philosophers and historians have suggested this, that something about scientific materialism was already prefigured in Christianity. In other words, secular materialism is a kind of moment in the life history of the incarnation of the divine. It's human societies. It's the Christian emphasis on the individual soul, and which becomes part of this Protestant work ethic, which fuels capitalism. Like you wouldn't have had secular modernity without this techno-capitalist economy, political economy, motivated by a manifest destiny, political anthropology, and theology. And so, the materialistic worldview is itself, in a way, it's the Antichrist, which is to say that it's constellated by its opposition to the Christian vision of spirit. And so, there's this need in Christianity to perform a kind of alchemical conjunctio to bring back together matter and spirit, and that's the whole point of the incarnation. And so I think, for me, the meta in metamodern Christianity implies that we have overcome the binary between history and eternity, between Jesus and the cosmic Christ. We've overcome the binary between religions, between in-group and out-group, because we've seen through to the core of what it is to be human and what it is to exist, right? And so that's what we expect from our religious traditions. And to the extent that science is devoted to the truth, it is itself one of our wisdom traditions itself, right? And so I think there's both a sense in which I'm saying, meta is overcoming these binaries, but meta is also leveling the playing field, in a sense, and saying, we don't want to say that religion is here and then science happens and it transcends and includes religion, because religion is growing alongside science always. And if one is going to have a relationship of, being the whole to the part over the other, it's going to be the religion side, I would think, right? Just historically speaking, science is not value neutral, right? It values the truth. Why does it value the truth? Because it believes that human beings are so equipped so as to be capable of understanding the world, that human beings are intelligent, and that nature is intelligible. But that's not, those aren't metaphysically neutral statements. There's an argument there's a justification that needs to underlie the scientists' belief in intelligibility, in the order of nature and the unity of nature. These are not just empirical observations. And so, yeah, I'm in agreement with a lot of the developmental language, but I also want to be careful there. I think we need to develop religiously just as we need to develop scientifically. So, that's my attempt to chime in here on metamodern Christianity. So much more to say, and I hope to do so, in dialogue with Brendan and John and anyone else who's interested in talking to me about Christ. And there are various ways to talk and not talk about that. But it's a conversation I'm very interested in having, and I think despite how odd it is in some ways that this has become a topic, um, I think it also feels, yeah, urgent, and that there's a real sense for us to rediscover our roles as human beings, and remember something about our nature, which contemporary techno-capitalist civilization doesn't afford us many opportunities to recognize. And it's, in some sense, yes, it's the deathless part of us, but it's also the part of us. I mean, we only access the deathless part of us by going head first, like face first, wide open, eyes wide open into death, our own death and the death of others, and always relating to one another through the fact that we are finite, and as the Buddha said, that we suffer together. And there's something called forth in human nature when we recognize these basic truths that all the world's religions ask us to look at and to attend to. Something happens, something changes in us, and so whatever the Christ event is, it's whatever else it is, it's a seed planted in the human psyche, and whether we water it or not, it's going to grow, and it's clearly transforming the earth, and it's transforming the human being, and it's transforming God. And it's terrifying, and it's awesome, and it's beautiful and overwhelming. But it's also a privilege, to be able to dialogos on this subject. So thanks for your attention.